Later that night, Eugene was summoned to see Gilead. Usually at around this time, he would have been doing some training to help digest his dinner. Fortunately, the invitation had come with enough spare warning that there was no need for him to head to the main mansion while reeking of sweat like last time. Eugene had washed and put on some formal clothes while being fussed over by Nina. Upon exiting the annex once he was done, he found that all the servants were already waiting outside. Hey there! They were all out here because of the man who had just greeted Eugene in a cheerful tone. He was Jin Lionheart, Patriarch Gilead Lionheart's youngest brother. Jin was known to be an oddball who had chosen to tag along on Gilead's training trip, and even at his age had yet to be married. And Master Jin, Nina cried out in surprise before bowing her head deeply. Following her lead, Eugene also bowed his head low, though he glanced up at Jin to get a look at him. If Jin had gotten married at the usual age, he might have already had a son about as old as Eugene, but the man still looked unbelievably young for his true age. However, his gray hair, which could be called a trademark of the Lionheart line, gave him a mature atmosphere despite his youthful face. This was due in a large part to the color of his hair, which looked almost white at first glance. Vermouth also had the same kind of hair, though unlike Jin, Vermouth's expressions had always been just as bleak as his hair. It seemed as if Eugene couldn't escape his blood ties to Vermouth, no matter what, as despite being from a collateral line, Eugene's hair also had streaks of gray running through it. Pleased to meet you. I am Eugene Lionheart, he introduced himself. Of course I know who you are. The truth is that you've drawn my attention ever since we first met on our return to the estate, Jin revealed. Excuse me. It's because you gave off the smell of sweat. Ah, not that it was a bad thing. Anyone who bears the name of Lionheart should always smell at least slightly sweaty, Jin joked with a laugh, revealing his pearly white teeth. He patted Eugene on the shoulder as he continued speaking. Also, I happen to have heard a lot about you from hold on. It'll be awkward if we just stand around talking like this, so let's get going first before we continue. So you're here to guide me to the Patriarch? Eugene asked. That's right. My brother wanted to send one of his knights, but I told him that I'd go and do it personally. I actually wanted to see you for myself, Jin laughed once again as he turned and set off.
As he quickly walked off, his gait proved to be just as lively as the sound of his laughter.
After tossing a goodbye back to Nina,
Eugene started to follow behind Jin.
Did you say that you wanted to see me in person? Eugene asked politely. That's what I said, and I meant it. After all, you defeated Cyan in a duel, and I've heard you've even won the bloodline continuation ceremony? Jin turned his head back to look at Eugene as if waiting for an answer. I also wanted to see the bloodline continuation ceremony in person, but it's tradition that no one except the Patriarch is allowed to watch the ceremony. Well, Master Lovelian also happened to be spectating beside my brother this year, but that's only because Lovelian helped set up this year's bloodline continuation ceremony. Is there really such a tradition? Strange, isn't it? But it's a real tradition. Well, I guess you could call it part of the Patriarch's privileges, like the fact that only the main family's Patriarch is allowed into the treasure vault. Similarly, only the Patriarch is allowed to have fun watching the bloodline continuation ceremony. Jin grumbled a complaint, only to tap himself on the lips in regret at having said too much. I know it might sound like it, but I'm not really complaining about my brother, you know. It's just that the traditions are, but if I say it like that, does it sound like I'm complaining about the family rules instead? I don't mind if you do, Eugene said agreeably. Jin smiled and revealed, my brother actually doesn't mind it when I complain about them either. Although they hadn't been talking for very long, Eugene had a rough idea of what Jin's personality was really like. His very attitude seemed to exude a sense of free-spiritedness. It was probably due to this character of his that he had decided not to marry yet. About Winid, Jin said as he stopped walking ahead of Eugene. Instead, he slowed his pace to walk alongside Eugene. Although I've never used it before, I know that it's a good sword. Make sure to cherish it. Is there any reason you haven't tried using it before? Eugene asked. Not really, it's just that I'm quite fond of my current sword. Jin grinned and pointed down to the sword he wore at his waist. It wasn't one of Vermouth's many swords. Doesn't it look cool? It's a sword that I found long ago while traveling around the world. But maybe because it's a sword that I got through my own hard work, I'm really attached to it. Is it a magic sword as well? Yes, but its magic isn't all that impressive. It can't compare to your Winid. Well, if I had to explain it, its magic allows me to absorb mana a little more smoothly or something like that. Despite Jin's claims, such an effect wasn't something to be underestimated. Although it hadn't seemed extraordinary at first glance, Eugene guessed that the sword might even have been made by the dwarves. Jin changed the subject. So how did you find the labyrinth? Although I've heard a few things from Cyan and Seal, I'd like to hear your perspective as you might have a different view of it. It was really fascinating, Eugene offered his opinion. So it seems that you didn't find it difficult, Jin observed as he burst into laughter. You really had to face both traps and monsters, then trolls on the way to the center, and finally a minotaur waiting at the end. That's way too much for kids to handle. Even Cyan and Seal didn't try to fight the trolls head-on. As for the minotaur, Brother and Lovelian were really being a little cruel with that. Is Cyan doing all right now? His body's fine, but his mind is a more complex matter. After all, it's not like we can open it up and take a look inside, can we? Well, Cyan is just taking his defeat hard because he's still immature. But it's better for him to experience such frustrations at a young age. Once he gets a bit older, it'll be harder to get over such setbacks. Jin clicked his tongue in commiseration and turned to look at Eugene. As for me, I'm actually feeling a little grateful to you. Thanks to you showing him up, Cyan's arrogance has been tempered slightly. But wasn't Cyan just bad-mouthing me to you? Of course he was. He even spied on you from a distance and called you a son of a bitch. It's cowardly to insult someone behind their backs. I thought so as well, so I smacked him a good one. With another smile, Jin again showed off his pearly white teeth. Because I've already drubbed him for it, don't needlessly get into a fight with Cyan later, okay? As long as he doesn't mess with me, I won't. That's a shame. If he could get beaten up a few more times for being rude, then Cyan might be able to correct his bad habits while improving his skills at the same time. But didn't you just say that I shouldn't fight with him? You're right. Well then, I'll just give you permission to fight with him whenever you want. That is, as long as you don't hurt him too badly. While they were discussing such topics, they arrived at the main mansion. Jin casually waved off the greetings from the servants and led Eugene upstairs. But why is the patriarch calling for me? Eugene finally asked. Maybe to compliment you, Jin guessed. I've received his compliments earlier. No matter how many times you've heard them, it's not like you can ever have too many compliments. It looks like Mr. Jin doesn't know the reason either. Well, it's not like I don't have any clues, but it's not something to get all worked up over, though it does have something to do with you and your future. Once they got to the top of the stairs, they walked down a long hallway. As this was his first time visiting the main mansion, Eugene looked at his surroundings with curious eyes. However, Jin said, suddenly stopping in his steps. Ahead of them stood a large, tightly shut door. I think it would be nice if we could see each other more often. Jin turned to look at Eugene with a slight smile as he said this. Me too, Eugene agreed, not having had a bad impression of the man. Eugene decided to return the smile to show his sincerity. Jin turned back to the front, his expression turning neutral, and knocked on the door. Come in, Gilead's voice was heard from inside. After opening the door for Eugene, Jin took a few steps back. Then he winked at Eugene and shooed him in. Although his personality is good, he's a bit overbearing. With a slight feeling of nervousness, Eugene entered the room. The spacious room had been furnished into the patriarch's personal office. Sorry for calling you so suddenly, Gilead led with an apology. It's fine, Eugene answered, bowing his head. Gilead smiled and pointed to the visitor seating area. For now, why don't you take a seat? Some refreshments had been prepared for him on a coffee table. However, Eugene didn't lay a hand on any of the cookies or tea and instead stared pointedly at Gilead. Although it was rude, his behavior was still in the acceptable range for a child. About the necklace, Gilead said, not taking offense to Eugene's attitude. Instead, he felt that the spunky look like Eugene's was actually kind of cute. The first impression of someone will forever skew how that person is viewed, and Gilead had had a good impression of Eugene.
I asked Master Lovelian to examine it, but it turned out to be just an ordinary necklace, Gilead continued.
So that was the case, Eugene feigned ignorance. He even read the earliest memories recorded in the necklace's mana, but nothing special was found. They even read the mana's memories. For a moment, Eugene almost revealed his panic before he quickly concealed the emotion. Oh yeah, there was a spell like that, wasn't there? But even though they had used one of Sienna's spells, they hadn't found anything special from the necklace. At these words, Eugene couldn't help feeling ashamed on behalf of his previous life as Hamel. There are memories recorded in the necklace, Eugene asked, trying not to sound too hurt. How should I explain it? To put it simply, Master Lovelian used a spell to read the history of where the necklace had come from. He said that the necklace was purchased in the streets of the capital around 100 years ago, Gilead recounted before handing the necklace to Eugene. After receiving the necklace, Eugene checked it carefully. No, there was no mistake about it. This was definitely the necklace that Hamel had worn 300 years ago, the keepsake left by his parents. There was no way he would mistake a necklace that he had constantly worn during his travels for over 20 years. Both the discoloration on the chain and the scratches on the cheap crystal hanging at the front were exactly the same as in his memories. In the first place, who'd be so crazy to sell an old necklace like this at a roadside stall? Such a necklace could only be sold if the seller was insane, and the buyer was even more insane. Lovelian could be lying, but there's no reason for him to do so. Could he really have read it wrong? An archwizard currently serving as the head of a tower of magic. If that wasn't the case, then that would mean a spell that can even deceive the head of a tower of magic has been cast on the necklace, creating a layer of new memories in the mana. But who on earth would have done that? Could it have been Vermouth? But what reason would that guy have for doing something like this? It wasn't unusual for someone to have taken a keepsake from their dead companion to commemorate him and stored it in their treasury. Vermouth hadn't seemed to be the type for such frivolities, but then again, Eugene had never expected that Vermouth would take more than 10 wives after returning from the devildom either. That was proof, if anything, that time changes people. But if they really wanted to commemorate me, they should have just killed all the demon kings. If they couldn't do that, then at the very least, they should have properly registered the necklace into the treasure vault. While feeling a complex mix of dissatisfaction and doubt, Eugene nodded his head to show he understood. Then is it okay for me to take this necklace? The necklace is completely worthless. Are you sure you still want it? For some reason, it just calls to me. Well, I suppose that there are times when items do that. Children were often attracted to strange things. Even Gilead used to collect old coins when he was a child.
Have you always liked such antiquities? Gilead asked curiously.
Eugene prevaricated, I don't hate them, but I just find this necklace strangely fascinating. Well, if you really want it, you may keep it. Thank you very much. With a grin, Eugene immediately hung the necklace around his neck before looking back up at Gilead. When Gilead was caught staring at Eugene, he gave a low cough and got up from his seat. Eugene, I called you here to give you the necklace, but there was one more reason as well. What reason would that be, sir? Instead of replying immediately, Gilead walked over and took a seat in the chair across from Eugene. Then he picked up a teacup and started fidgeting with it as if trying to sort out his thoughts. This might seem sudden, but I have an offer for you. It's nothing unpleasant, and in fact, this offer is for the sake of your future. No way, Eugene thought, his eyebrows twitching in frustration at the halting pace of Gilead's words. An offer concerning his future. In such situations, for an offer to be worded like that, there were only a few options of what that offer might be. Eugene, are you? Sir Patriarch, Eugene interrupted him. Gilead stopped mid-sentence and tilted his head in curiosity. Eugene continued, Seal is kind and cute, but I don't want to start thinking about marriage so soon. Eugene was sure that this was about engaging him to Seal. If he thought about it, things had seemed a little strange from the very beginning. Even after Eugene had left her twin brother in such a state, Seal had still come looking for him the very next day with a smile on her face, and ever since then, she had been clinging to his side like an annoying tick. Also, before the bloodline continuation ceremony, Seal had been acting so overtly friendly to Eugene that it felt off-putting, and she kept blabbing some nonsense about how he should call her Big Sis, just because she was a few months older than him. I wondered why she kept going on about that, so she's already trying to put me in my place as her future consort. 1. That was definitely it. And what was with her behavior in the labyrinth? She had actually giggled as she watched her brother get beaten up by the Minotaur. She was sitting beside me then as well. It felt like there had also been times where Seal subtly kept Desra from getting close to him. Recalling all the times he had met with Seal since arriving at the main estate, Eugene felt increasingly sure of his suspicions. It may not have been planned that way from the start, but after the twins had walked over to pick a fight, they must have decided to trap him in an arranged marriage upon seeing the result of their duel. No wonder. So that's why he was willing to give me a weapon from their treasure vault. They intend to tie me to the main family by engaging me to Seal. How could they have come up with such a terrible scheme while still outwardly treating him with so much courtesy? If it was to achieve their purpose, were they even willing to sacrifice their daughter's future? To be able to hide their evil intentions to such an extent, just as expected from the descendants of Vermouth. No, even Vermouth wouldn't stoop this low. Inside Eugene's head, Gilead's image underwent a rapid transformation. Eugene continued trying to excuse himself. After all, I'm too young to even be thinking about marriage. I need to get my father's permission as well, and even if my father does allow it, I don't want to get married to Seal. Hold on, Gilead, who had been listening to Eugene's speech in shock, suddenly raised his hand. Eugene, I think you may be misunderstanding something. Huh? I didn't call you here with the intention of engaging you to Seal. That's something for Seal to decide. But of course, your opinion is important as well. In fact, he actually thought that it was quite a good idea, but Gilead didn't have the slightest intention of forcing either of them into such an arrangement. Is that so? Eugene choked out these words as he felt his face burn red hot in embarrassment. It looked like he really had put his foot in his mouth this time. I called you here because I wanted to offer to adopt you. Huh? Eugene thought he had been surprised before, but Gilead's follow-up was even more shocking. So they had that method available to them. Eugene got their reasoning for their offer of adoption, but at the same time, he wanted to leap out of the window in embarrassment. He wanted to tear off his own mouth for admitting that he didn't want to marry a 13-year-old kid. No, more than that, he wanted to smash his own head for thinking that he was about to be engaged to a 13-year-old chick in the first place. I must have been crazy. After having to act like a child, it seemed that his mind had somehow become like a child's. An adoption? This is all too sudden, Eugene mumbled distractedly. But not as sudden as an engagement, right? Gilead teased with a grin. I'm sorry for getting the wrong idea. But do you really hate the idea of getting married to Seal? From the way you speak of her, it doesn't seem like you're completely against the idea. No, I hate it. HM. Gilead put on a disappointed expression, but he soon let it fall and continued speaking. Setting this talk of engagement aside, what do you think about being adopted? Eugene hesitated, but my father is waiting for me in Goodall. If you wish, I'll invite Gerhardt to stay at the main estate as well. So then I'll have two fathers. That's right, but your biological father is, and always will be, Gerhardt. Then I'm not sure what's the point of me getting adopted. There's no need to think about it too much, Gilead smiled faintly as he picked up his teacup. It's just to bring your family into the same fold as the main family. Although nominally I'll be your adoptive father, that doesn't mean you need to treat me as your real father. Of course, that's only if you agree to the adoption.
I feel like this would trouble my father greatly, admitted Eugene.
I'll probably have a lot of things that I need to go over with Gerhardt, but Eugene, I too am a father of 3 children. I am not trying to steal Gerhardt's son away from him. HM. Although I've never met Gerhardt, I promise to respect him as if he were my older brother. Eugene frowned. Does that mean that, if I refuse, the patriarch won't show my father respect? There's no way, Gilead burst into laughter at such a bold question. Although I'm embarrassed to even say this out loud, I'm not such a childish person. So if you refuse, I'll just feel a little regret. That's all. I will, of course, respect your choice and wish you the best of luck with your future. However, I really do hope to allow your future to shine as part of the main family. I don't think this is an issue that I should decide by myself. For now, Eugene decided to postpone making a decision. While in the end, it would be up to Eugene to decide whether or not to accept the proposal, he still wanted to hear his father's, Gerhardt's, opinion. If that's the case, then let's leave it until after the banquet, Gilead decided. The banquet, originally meant to celebrate the end of the bloodline continuation ceremony, was scheduled for the following evening. I'll send messengers to Goodall and tell them to respectfully escort your father over, Gilead said. I am grateful for the patriarch's consideration, but I also feel a little guilty for the inconvenience, Eugene confessed. Don't say that. You don't owe me anything. You've proven yourself the most outstanding child in this year's bloodline continuation ceremony. It would be a sad affair if your father could not be with his son during your moment of celebration and glory. Thank you so much. Without showing any further hesitation, Eugene bowed his head in thanks. By doing so, he was also hiding his joy. Truthfully, he was interested in the offer to join the main family through adoption. If Gerhardt's personality was just as terrible as his sword skills, then he would have accepted being adopted by Gilead without any hesitation. However, Gerhardt was in fact a truly caring father. Unfortunately, due to the memories of his past life, Eugene had never really been able to accept Gerhardt as his father, but even still, he liked and respected the man. Earlier, you said that this would be good for my future as well, Eugene focused, putting down the teacup he'd been sipping from. What exactly did you mean by that? If you're fostered with the main family, there are a lot of benefits you can enjoy, Gilead enticed Eugene. He was glad that Eugene was showing interest in his offer. For example, that's right, didn't you say that there weren't any nights you could go to for instruction back in Gidal? But at our main estate, you won't need to worry about that. After all, we have a lot of excellent nights here. If I'm going to learn from anyone, I want to learn from the best, Eugene demanded, as he tried to smile as innocently as possible. Then, looking straight at Gilead, he continued speaking. If I'm adopted by you, patriarch, will I be able to learn from you as well? Eugene was curious to see just how strong the Lionheart clan's patriarch truly was. The Korean word used here was Saeol, which basically means a son-in-law who marries into his wife's family, rather than a daughter-in-law marrying into her husband's family, and has a lower status because of this. Part of the reason why it's considered shameful is that by marrying into his wife's family, the husband is giving up the responsibility and duty of passing down his family name, as his children will inherit his wife's surname instead. Although that doesn't apply in this case, as both Eugene and Seal have the same surname, it still implies that Eugene will have a lower standing than his wife. Gilead was not offended by such a daring yet childish request. Instead, he actually felt both pleased and sympathetic at the hungry look on Eugene's face. If a child truly was a scion of a martial family, then they should have such a greedy desire. Of course, I'll be able to teach you, Gilead said, looking at Eugene with a happy smile. However, if you want to learn from the very best, then there's someone even better than me. Who is that? Eugene asked. It's Jin. Eugene recalled Jin and his shiny white teeth. When he was opening the door for Eugene, Jin had said that he'd like it if they could see each other more often. In the past, my skills were better than his, but currently that's no longer the case, Gilead admitted. Really? Eugene asked skeptically. Is there any reason for me to lie and downplay my skills? Gilead returned the question. Eugene's eyes sparkled with curiosity and interest. Gilead continued speaking with a low laugh. Have you received instruction on your family's mana training scripture from your father? No, I haven't even learned its name yet, Eugene said. Well, that's quite unusual, Gilead commented. Usually, children from the collateral lines were instructed in their mana training scriptures before leaving for the bloodline continuation ceremony. That way, they could try to initiate their mana as soon as the bloodline continuation ceremony was over. Since they were already several years behind the children from the main family, the collateral descendants would try to speed up their initiation into mana, even if it was just by a few days. I told my father that I didn't want to learn it yet. If I needlessly learned it beforehand, I felt like I might accidentally start training my mana without even meaning to, Eugene explained. So that was the case. After all, you're so diligent that you haven't neglected your training, even once during your entire stay here. Gilead nodded his head in understanding. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel pity. Gerhardt's household was one of the weakest among all the collateral branches. Even so, as long as they still held the name Lionheart, families like Gerhardt's could live a prosperous life as local landlords, but their children couldn't dream of much more than that. On the other hand, what about Desra and Garge's families? Among the collateral lines, families as powerful as theirs could only be counted on the fingers of one hand. Their two families were capable of making all sorts of preparations to support the growth of their children. They've probably already started purchasing mana stones years ago. Crystals of mana could be found in the bodies of higher-leveled monsters and in mana-dense ores like mithril. These aggregations of mana were called mana stones. When first initiating mana, the assistance of these mana stones could not be neglected. Gerhardt's household probably doesn't have enough money to afford any mana stones. Due to their high utility and the difficulty of obtaining them, the price of mana stones was exorbitant. On top of that, for initiates to get the most benefit out of mana stones, they needed someone with outstanding abilities to guide them. Eward, Cyan, and Seal had each been personally guided by Gilead when they first initiated their mana. That was why he couldn't help but feel regret. The boy had already proven his excellence, but the soil of Gerhardt's countryside household was too poor to allow Eugene's talent to bloom. However, Gilead absolutely couldn't allow such words to leave his lips. Even if they were said out of honest worry and concern, Gilead didn't want his careless words to cause a son to turn against his father and the family he was born to. Instead of Eugene, this was something that he needed to discuss with Gerhardt. However, even if Eugene didn't hear it from him directly, he could guess what Gilead was thinking. It wasn't difficult to figure it out, considering how much compassion was showing in Gilead's eyes. It can't be helped. It's true that our family is poor after all.
After this, the two continued to talk about various things.
As the banquet's guest of honor, Eugene was asked if he needed anything or wanted any particular dishes served at the banquet. Time flowed quickly as they touched on various topics. Finally, when a glance out of the window revealed that it had turned completely dark outside, Gilead stood up. "It looks like I've kept you up for far too long," Gilead apologized. "No, it was fun for me too," Eugene denied any fault. "I'll call someone to escort you over soon, so please wait a little longer." "It's fine. You don't need to do that. It's not like the annex is that far from here. I'm fully capable of walking back in the dark," Eugene reassured Gilead. After refusing Gilead's offer once more, Eugene left the patriarch's office. As he was walking down the corridor to the stairs, he sensed that someone was sneakily lying in wait for him on the other side of the hallway. It was Ancilla. She was attempting to stage this as an accidental meeting, but Eugene wasn't surprised in the least. He had been able to notice Ancilla while she was still hiding out of sight, thanks to the scent of her perfume. As she turned the corner, Ancilla fluttered her eyelashes in feigned shock. "Oh my," Ancilla gasped in feigned shock, unaware that her ruse had already been seen through. "It's Eugene, isn't it?" "Yes, good evening, madam." While deliberately putting on a surprised look of his own, Eugene bowed his head in greeting. "My name is Eugene Lionheart, and I hail from Gidal."
Of course I know your name, Ancilla said with a fake smile.
Ancilla hated Eugene. It wasn't just because he had handed her beloved son an embarrassing defeat, but this cheeky brat had also given the main family its first defeat ever in the bloodline continuation ceremony. And there wasn't even a single reason why Ancilla should actually like Eugene. That said, she couldn't treat him with hostility. No matter what had happened, he was definitely a talented kid. Since he could already reach such heights at his age, as long as he didn't suddenly die somewhere along the way, he would continue to grow and perhaps even be able to raise his humble family out of obscurity within 10 years. There's no need to make an enemy out of him in advance. That was why she had allowed Seal to stick to Eugene's side. Unlike her husband, Ancilla thought that the idea of ensnaring Eugene and Seal into an arranged marriage was actually quite a promising plan for the future. "I heard that you and the patriarch were having a private conversation, but it looks like the two of you chatted for quite a while. I didn't know that you were still here," Ancilla continued, speaking to Eugene with a feigned smile. Eugene felt a strange pressure emanating from behind her kind smile and overly sweet tone. So, for now, Eugene decided to test her intentions with a question. "Is there something you wish to speak to me about?" Gilead had responded quite favorably to his bold behavior, but this wasn't the case for Ancilla. His arrogance is already skyrocketing, though she could understand why. It must already be quite exciting for such a country bumpkin to visit the main estate. On top of that, he had even managed to defeat a child from the main family in a duel on his very first day, and then went on to win the bloodline continuation ceremony. She secretly wanted to crush his arrogantly upturned nose, but Ancilla firmly held back this urge. "After all, this kid might become my son-in-law one day." While inwardly repeating this to herself, Ancilla said, "I was curious about what you might have discussed with the patriarch." "Because it was a private conversation between the patriarch and me, I'm afraid I don't dare tell you," Eugene refused her subtle inquiry. "Oh, right. Of course, that's the case. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, so please don't feel pressured. Besides that, there were actually a few other things I wanted to talk to you about." Ancilla trailed off, seeming apologetic. Eugene simply tilted his head silently in question. Ancilla maintained her friendly smile as she added, "Well, wasn't Cyan very rude to you just a few days ago? If it were under the usual circumstances as Cyan's mother, I should have already apologized to you personally. But as the bloodline continuation ceremony was just ahead of us, things were out of control, and my apology was delayed." Like hell, she would have? If she had really wanted to apologize to Eugene, then Ancilla could have just gone looking for him that very day. But instead of pointing that out, Eugene simply said, "There's no need for that." At that time, I had already reconciled whatever problems I had with Cyan. Oh my, for a child your age, you sure are mature and broad-minded. Ancilla's cheeks twitched as she forced herself to keep smiling. If those are your feelings on the incident, then that's fortunate for us. As for Cyan, who showed you such disrespect, I've given him a strict warning, so I hope that the two of you will get along with each other from now on. Of course, I will try my best. After all, we do share the same name, so ultimately, aren't we all part of the same family? Eugene replied with a grin. On the other hand, Ancilla's face twisted into a complex expression. He said that they were part of the same family. Although he wasn't wrong, for some reason, when the word family dropped from that irritating boy's lips, she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Would you mind if I take my leave now? Eugene asked. Yes, that's fine, Ancilla permitted. Ancilla didn't want to hold on to Eugene any longer. She needed to be careful of drawing her husband's attention, and she also needed to be wary of the head wife, Tanny's. It wouldn't look good for her to keep talking to Eugene in the hallway like this. Be careful on your way back, Ancilla said with a slight smile as she patted Eugene on the shoulder. What an irritating brat, she thought to herself. Even though Ancilla had planned out this meeting, it still felt like she had started the conversation on the wrong foot. However, she would just have to take better care from now on whenever she spoke to Eugene. Yes, I hope you have a good night. Eugene also bade farewell, bowing his head deeply. He didn't know for certain what kind of personality Ancilla was hiding behind that smile. However, looking at the harassment she had authorized for him on that very first day, she obviously had quite the cruel streak. As such, he didn't want to needlessly get involved with her. 2 days later, Gerhardt Lionheart arrived from distant Gittol. Although only a single knight, Gordon, had been sent to escort Eugene. This time, the patriarch's own younger brother, Jin, had personally accompanied Gerhardt to the main estate. This fact caused Gerhardt to feel immense pressure. The only times he had been to the main estate were for the bloodline continuation ceremony 20 years ago and the patriarch's succession ceremony. Following that, there had been no further visits to the capital city, let alone the main estate. So Eugene really won this year's bloodline continuation ceremony? My son did that? Truly. Gerhardt was currently suspecting that he might be in the middle of a dream. Or else, maybe all of this was a prank meant to make fun of him. But what reason would they have to do that? What on earth could cause the main family of the Lionheart clan, the direct descendants of the great Vermouth, to summon the patriarch of a small collateral family out in the remote countryside just to play this sort of prank on him? However, he simply couldn't accept it so easily. When Jin had first arrived at his doorstep, he had been so surprised that he almost passed out. He was even more surprised when he saw the luxurious carriage waiting outside, flying the unmistakable banner of the courageous Lionheart. Even after hearing Jin recount the stories of what Eugene had done on the way here, his surprise still hadn't faded in the least. After traveling through several warp gates, they had arrived at the capital. It was only when they reached the main family's personal warp gate, which was only used for special occasions, that Gerhardt accepted that this was all really happening. My son, he really defeated the children of the main family. Gerhardt felt like he was about to start crying. It wasn't like he hadn't held any expectations for Eugene. His son had always been out of the ordinary, ever since he was young. He was such an exceptional child that Gerhardt had sometimes doubted if Eugene really was his son. That was why he had always felt guilty. Gerhardt knew full well that with his own capabilities, he couldn't give his son the lift that Eugene needed for his talents to soar. He had thought that the bloodline continuation ceremony would force Eugene to see the reality of his situation. After all, no matter how exceptional the collateral descendants were, defeat was still inevitable. It should not have been possible to overcome the gap that existed between the direct line and the collateral lines by innate talent and hard work alone. But, Father? The moment he saw his son, Gerhardt forgot all propriety as tears began pouring down his face. Pride and guilt warred in equal measure as he looked at his only son. The Lionheart flag was flying proudly in front of the majestic and splendid main family's mansion. His son stood in the center of this intimidating scene, smiling brightly as he waved his hand at Gerhardt. Gerhardt had never been able to provide Eugene with any meaningful support. He hadn't been able to find an excellent knight to serve as Eugene's teacher, and Gerhardt himself was incapable of providing such instruction. Apart from the wooden swords and training dummies, he hadn't been able to supply anything else. Nevertheless, his son had been able to attain victory at the bloodline continuation ceremony. My son, Eugene. Gerhardt pulled his son into an embrace as he continued to shed tears. Eugene was startled to see Gerhardt like this, but he soon slipped on a childish expression and returned Gerhardt's embrace. I'm so proud of you. The fact that you're my son makes me so proud, Gerhardt sobbed through his tears. I told you that I would send you good news, didn't I? Did you really not believe me? Eugene teased his father. Eugene did, in fact, say this when he left Gidal to attend the bloodline continuation ceremony. Of course, Gerhardt hadn't been able to wholeheartedly believe in these words. This fact also caused Gerhardt to feel some guilt. That's right. You did say that, didn't you, my son? I'm so sorry for not believing in you, Gerhardt sobbed out between sniffs. Hey now, what's with the apologies again? If I were in your place, I wouldn't have believed it either. As Eugene gave this soothing reply, he pinched Gerhardt's belly.
This instinctively caused Gerhardt to step backward in shock.
The stinging pain coming from his thick gut once again reminded him that this was real. But his son wasn't the only one waiting for him at the gates. Right behind Gerhardt was the patriarch's younger brother, Jen, and in front of him. Gerhardt swallowed visibly and quickly pulled a handkerchief out of a breast pocket. In front of him stood Gilead Lionheart, the Lionheart patriarch who Gerhardt had last seen during the ceremony of his ascension to the seat of patriarch. Gerhardt could still clearly recognize Gilead's appearance from that event. He quickly wiped the handkerchief over his face, which was drenched in tears and snot, then bowed his head to Gilead. Apologies for the late greeting. My name is Gerhardt Lionheart, and I hail from Gidal. I am Gilead Lionheart. Please forgive my rudeness of inviting you in such haste. Gilead walked directly over to Gerhardt and offered him a handshake. Startled, Gerhardt scrubbed his hands on the sides of his trousers before shaking the offered hand. What rudeness! I don't consider it that way at all. In fact, I am extremely grateful that you have invited me like this, Gerhardt said. I don't want to take up too much of your time with your son, but if it is okay with you, would you mind coming inside with me for a short conversation? Gilead didn't wish to have a lengthy exchange of greetings with Gerhardt out here in the open. As a member of the collateral lines, Gerhardt couldn't help but keep his head bowed low in the presence of the direct line's patriarch, and Gilead didn't want Eugene to see his father like this.
Of course, that's fine with me, Gerhardt immediately agreed.
Eugene considerately withdrew, allowing the two men to pass. While shooting curious glances at Eugene, Gerhardt followed Gilead into the main family's mansion. It felt like his son had a lot of stories to tell him, and there were many things that Gerhardt wanted to ask Eugene in turn, but Gerhardt stayed quiet as he left Eugene for the moment. He was curious about the intention behind this offer to have a conversation with the patriarch. When he thought about it normally, the fact that his son had surpassed the main family's children to win the bloodline continuation ceremony was a huge insult to the main family. Were they trying to put pressure on him because of this? Refreshments had already been prepared for their enjoyment in the patriarch's office. Gilead got straight to the point after watching Gerhardt wet his throat that had dried up out of tension with some tea. You're talking about an adoption? Gerhardt asked in disbelief. That's right, Gilead confirmed. He hadn't just recklessly thrown the offer at Gerhardt. Instead, Gilead had explained in detail exactly why he was making this offer. Eugene's talents were so brilliant that he couldn't be left to his own devices. However, for his potential to bloom splendidly, the support of the main family was absolutely necessary. Of course, as a representative of the main family, I promised to do my best to protect Lord Gerhardt's household from harm. However, in reality, there was a limit to the protection that the main family could provide. Even if you refuse the offer, there will be no grudges held by the main family. I also promise that I will still spare no effort to support Eugene's growth as much as possible. Wasn't this really just a dream? No, he couldn't escape from reality like this. Gerhardt clutched his spinning head. And so, his child's future, and the greater opportunities and possibilities that the main family could offer. Gerhardt understood what was at stake so well that his heart ached for it. Gerhardt keenly realized his own helplessness and relative poverty. Eugene could enjoy an incomparable amount of glory by becoming the adopted child of the main family than he ever could by remaining as the only son of Gerhardt from Giddal. I don't believe this is something I can decide by myself. Gerhardt smiled bitterly and shook his head. I think it's time for me to have a conversation with my son. He hadn't been able to find an excellent knight to serve as Eugene's teacher, and Gerhardt himself was incapable of providing such instruction. Apart from the wooden swords and training dummies, he hadn't been able to supply anything else. Nevertheless, his son had been able to attain victory at the bloodline continuation ceremony. My son, Eugene? Gerhardt pulled his son into an embrace as he continued to shed tears. Eugene was startled to see Gerhardt like this, but he soon slipped on a childish expression and returned Gerhardt's embrace. I'm so proud of you. The fact that you're my son makes me so proud, Gerhardt sobbed through his tears. I told you that I would send you good news, didn't I? Did you really not believe me? Eugene teased his father. Eugene did, in fact, say this when he left Giddal to attend the bloodline continuation ceremony.
Of course, Gerhardt hadn't been able to wholeheartedly believe in these words.
This fact also caused Gerhardt to feel some guilt. That's right. You did say that, didn't you, my son? I'm so sorry for not believing in you, Gerhardt sobbed out between sniffs. Hey now, what's with the apologies again? If I were in your place, I wouldn't have believed it either. As Eugene gave this soothing reply, he pinched Gerhardt's belly. This instinctively caused Gerhardt to step backward in shock. The stinging pain coming from his thick gut once again reminded him that this was real. But his son wasn't the only one waiting for him at the gates. Right behind Gerhardt was the patriarch's younger brother, Jen, and in front of him. Gerhardt swallowed visibly and quickly pulled a handkerchief out of a breast pocket. In front of him stood Gilead Lionheart, the Lionheart patriarch who Gerhardt had last seen during the ceremony of his ascension to the seat of patriarch. Gerhardt could still clearly recognize Gilead's appearance from that event. He quickly wiped the handkerchief over his face, which was drenched in tears and snot, then bowed his head to Gilead. Apologies for the late greeting. My name is Gerhardt Lionheart, and I hail from Giddal. I am Gilead Lionheart. Please forgive my rudeness of inviting you in such haste. Gilead walked directly over to Gerhardt and offered him a handshake. Startled, Gerhardt scrubbed his hands on the sides of his trousers before shaking the offered hand. What rudeness! I don't consider it that way at all. In fact, I am extremely grateful that you have invited me like this, Gerhardt said. I don't want to take up too much of your time with your son, but if it is okay with you, would you mind coming inside with me for a short conversation? Gilead didn't wish to have a lengthy exchange of greetings with Gerhardt out here in the open. As a member of the collateral lines, Gerhardt couldn't help but keep his head bowed low in the presence of the direct line's patriarch, and Gilead didn't want Eugene to see his father like this. Of course, that's fine with me, Gerhardt immediately agreed. Eugene considerately withdrew, allowing the two men to pass. While shooting curious glances at Eugene, Gerhardt followed Gilead into the main family's mansion. It felt like his son had a lot of stories to tell him, and there were many things that Gerhardt wanted to ask Eugene in turn, but Gerhardt stayed quiet as he left Eugene for the moment. He was curious about the intention behind this offer to have a conversation with the patriarch. When he thought about it normally, the fact that his son had surpassed the main family's children to win the bloodline continuation ceremony was a huge insult to the main family. Were they trying to put pressure on him because of this? But if that was what they were trying to do, it felt like Jin was much too cheerful to have been sent as their emissary to do so, and it hadn't felt like anything was out of place with Eugene. Patriarch Gilead also seemed far too polite to hold any intention of embarrassing him like this. Refreshments had already been prepared for their enjoyment in the patriarch's office. Gilead got straight to the point after watching Gerhardt wet his throat that had dried up out of tension with some tea. You're talking about an adoption? Gerhardt asked in disbelief. That's right, Gilead confirmed. He hadn't just recklessly thrown the offer at Gerhardt. Instead, Gilead had explained in detail exactly why he was making this offer. Eugene's talents were so brilliant that he couldn't be left to his own devices. However, for his potential to bloom splendidly, the support of the main family was absolutely necessary. A child of a collateral line had won the bloodline continuation ceremony by defeating those of the direct line. While it was a blessing for the Lionheart clan to have such a talented sprout, it could also stir into action those among the Lionheart's countless collateral branches who held seditious thoughts. There was a risk that a conspiracy of these rebellious dissidents might reach out to Eugene. If Eugene didn't agree to their offer, they might even try to put pressure on him in some form or another. Of course, as a representative of the main family, I promised to do my best to protect Lord Gerhardt's household from harm. However, in reality, there was a limit to the protection that the main family could provide. Even if you refuse the offer, there will be no grudges held by the main family. I also promise that I will still spare no effort to support Eugene's growth as much as possible. Haha, Gerhardt unconsciously let out a laugh. Wasn't this really just a dream? No, he couldn't escape from reality like this. Gerhardt clutched his spinning head. Eugene? Adopted by the main family, Gerhardt attempted to sort out his thoughts. Gilead started to speak when he saw Gerhardt remain silent. If Eugene were to be adopted, you, Lord Gerhardt, may also be accepted into the main family. I know that this offer comes as a shock, but I mean no disrespect with what I am about to say next. Having interrupted Gilead like this, Gerhardt took a deep breath before continuing to speak. For showing such high regard for my son's potential and consideration for my own feelings, I offer you my deepest gratitude. However, in my view, I have no choice but to consider what would be best for my son's future. And so, even though the patriarch's intentions are well-meaning and honest, I am worried that others within the main family might persecute Eugene. Gilead didn't feel offended by this concern. Instead, he actually felt respect for Gerhardt, who was brave enough to state his opinions firmly. Although I was born a Lionheart, I am but a humble person who has never truly lived up to the Lionheart name. I've always wished to fully support my son's future, but I've always carried the guilt that my humble means will prevent my son from achieving his brightest future. Gerhardt admitted his insecurity. Even as his voice wavered, Gerhardt continued speaking, though he clasped his trembling hands together to suppress the turbulent emotions he was feeling. The patriarch already has 3 children, don't you? If my son is adopted into your family, no matter the reason for his adoption, won't he be treated as an unwelcome outsider? Asked Gerhardt. I understand what you're trying to say, Gilead nodded. But the main family values its traditions. So even if Eugene was adopted into the main family, succeeding in my position as the patriarch would be very difficult. Gerhardt listened silently. My wives and children are also aware of this fact, this tradition. Unfortunately, it cannot be overturned in my generation. I will promise you one thing. I don't want to limit Eugene's future.
However, my will alone cannot represent the will of the main family or of the elders in the council. Gilead offered this caveat.
All right, Gerhardt recognized Gilead's sincerity. As long as that boy Eugene doesn't become too ambitious, he will be able to freely display his talents with the help of the main family. Becoming the patriarch will be difficult for him. However, for a moment, Gilead stayed silent before bowing his head deeply and continuing. Lord Gerhardt, I hope that you will not be offended by these next words. It would be far better for Eugene's future if he was nurtured as a member of the main family than if he were to remain in Gidal. As long as he doesn't hold any ambitions of becoming the patriarch, Eugene will be able to build up a friendship with my children, as they will all become siblings once he is adopted into the main family. Their relationships will open up many more opportunities and possibilities for Eugene in the future. Gilead felt quite guilty for saying such things. Eugene's talents were superior to his children's. That was obviously so with Ewart, but even Cyan and Seal's amazing talents couldn't compare to Eugene's. Since there was already such a gap at their young age, the difference would become even more pronounced within the next few years. However, Eugene still couldn't become the patriarch. Gilead actually wanted to see what would happen if Eugene were to become the patriarch, and he genuinely wished for Eugene to bring glory to the main family. But these two desires were incompatible. In the first place, a collateral descendant who was adopted into the main family becoming the patriarch would undermine the traditions and prestige of the main family. Even if Gilead, the current patriarch, didn't care about that, the Lionheart clan would be turned into a laughingstock, and the council would never allow such a thing to happen. In their eyes, the direct line had to maintain its superiority over the collateral lines. The bloodline continuation ceremony was a tradition held for this reason and this reason alone. I suppose that would be the case. Gerhardt accepted the truth with a long sigh and a nod. His child's future, and the greater opportunities and possibilities that the Maine family could offer. Gerhardt understood what was at stake so well that his heart ached for it. Gerhardt keenly realized his own helplessness and relative poverty.
Eugene could enjoy an incomparable amount of glory by becoming the adopted child of the Maine family than he ever could by remaining as the only son of Gerhardt from Goodall.
I don't believe this is something I can decide by myself. Gerhardt smiled bitterly and shook his head. I think it's time for me to have a conversation with my son.